another week of Three True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher, here with you as always. We are coming right up to the end of this preview series, our last preview episode, getting you ready for the college basketball season. You know what that means? We are less than 1 week away from tipping off and getting real college basketball underway. We've had secret scrimmages, charity scrimmages, all kinds of scrimmages going on over the past couple of weeks. We've learned about some teams. We've maybe not learned as much as we really think we do from these scrimmages. A lot of people out, precautionary reasons, preseason injuries, whatever the case is, eligibility. Take it with a grain of salt. That's all I'm going to say as we talk about preseason scrimmages. But today, we're not focused on preseason scrimmages. We might talk about one or two here or there, but our primary focus is on the ACC and the AAC. That's right, the Atlantic Coast Conference and the American Athletic Conference. We will start in this first segment. We'll run through the ACC. We will run through Duke. What can they do? North Carolina, what are my thoughts on them? We talked a little bit about them when the preseason AP poll came out. Where do I have them stacking up? Can NC State find some success this year? Clemson, what are they going to look like? We'll go through all of those teams and more through that conference, what you need to know. When we come back in the second segment, Parth Upadhyaya from the Daily Memphian will get us updated on all things Memphis basketball. We will be talking, of course, about the DeAndre Williams saga. Still not eligible. No word on a potential waiver to get him another year of eligibility. We'll see what the latest on that is. The Mikey Williams situation, not with the team, but facing multiple felony gun charges. What's kind of the benefit to keeping him around? Is there any? What does he think that Penny Hardaway and the staff should do in that situation? We'll talk about that and get, of course, a preview of that team in the second segment. We come back in the third. We will run through the American. We'll talk about Memphis and FAU up at the top in particular. We'll talk about Tulane. What do they bring back? I think they've got a little bit of an underrated roster. I think they were also a victim of the transfer portal this year. Had a potential to really bring back a legitimate roster that could have made, I think, maybe a run when we got to March. So we'll break down all of that. SMU, of course, always going to be in play. Plenty of others to go through and talk about. Then next week we'll have real college basketball to talk about. We will be discussing opening night fixtures. So before we go any further, let's talk about the ACC. Let's talk about who is at the top of this conference, and it's got to be Duke. Jon Scheyer, last year, I thought did really well for a first-year head coach with a young roster. You know, young roster is not exactly how you play winning basketball nowadays. At least that's the conventional wisdom. He went against that last year. John Calipari, of course, goes against it year after year. But I thought he did a good job of integrating a lot of those different players. Jeremy Roach, of course, a leader on that team. Ryan Young, a guy who came in, didn't give them big minutes by any means, not a massive contributor, but a veteran guy, kind of show everyone what you do when you're in a college basketball system like that of Duke. And so this year they bring back Jeremy Roach again. Kyle Filipowski shocked many by returning. Sean Stewart comes in. You bring in a lot of talent. Tyrese Proctor, how could we skip over him when we start talking about this Duke basketball team? I think that this is one of the most experienced Duke teams that we've seen in quite a while now. And so we go from a young, inexperienced team to a more veteran team than we had the year before. But don't get me wrong, they still have plenty of young talent. Caleb Foster comes in as a freshman. Jared McCain. As I said before, Sean Stewart. You've got TJ Power coming in as a freshman. They bring in multiple, again, five-star recruits. So now you couple those five-star recruits, they brought in plenty last year. You couple that with multiple players returning for their sophomore season. You've got Jeremy Roach returning for a senior season. And I think this is one of the deepest and best Duke basketball teams that we've seen in the last few years and has the potential to be the first launching platform for the Jon Scheyer era with the Blue Devils. I really do think that this is the best roster in the AAC. The ACC. Don't think it's particularly close. I mean, just the NBA talent that is in this group, the guys who could prove that they are NBA level players, they are at the top of this conference. But as we go into this second group, I think that I put 3 in this group. And I think that number 2 on this list, number 2 overall, so first in this group, Miami is higher up in my mind than the other 2, but they're still in this group. And that second group is, of course, teams that can contend for the title if they click together, if things go right, if they play the way they need to play. Miami, under Jim Larrañaga, how could you doubt them? The runs that they've been on in recent years, the sustained success, their ability to bring in transfers and to continue rolling through year after year, bringing in new players, guys who can have a winning impact with that group. Last year, we talked about them as a veteran group. They bring back some key pieces. Norchad Omier, I think, is primed for a huge season for the Hurricanes, and he really leads the way in that front court to be something more than a borderline top 25 team, which I think many people will expect them to be. This roster is not, like I said, it's not going to be as sexy as the Duke roster, but you've got plenty of experience there. You've got Matthew Cleveland coming in from Florida State, a guy who still is a borderline NBA prospect, was considered a great NBA prospect at one time. Bensley Joseph, Wooga Poplar. I mean, Kaishan George comes in as a freshman. I really like the makeup of this team. Nigel Pack, of course, comes back as well in his second year in the system after transferring from Kansas State. So that Omier-Pack duo, it's going to be about how they fill things out on the wing. That will determine what they're able to do, because they had a lot of veteran guys who were able to make an impact on the wing for them last season. How do they fill those roles? I know Wooga Poplar will be a big part of that. Kaishan George as well will likely get a significant role as a freshman. But you never know exactly what it's going to look like until you go out there and you get it done. But this is a Miami team. I'm not betting against them as long as Jim Larrañaga is leading that program and bringing in the kind of talent that he is year in and year out. We move on, and I think this next to Virginia and North Carolina. North Carolina, we talked about them in the AP poll segment a couple weeks ago. They just, I don't know. There's not evidence to suggest that they are some top 10 level team. I know they bring back Armando Bacot, but outside of that March Madness run, when have they looked like a top 10 team with Armando Bacot on the roster? You know, you bring back RJ Davis, Harrison Ingram transfers in. You bring in a couple of mid-major transfers that either will get that last starting spot or they'll come off the bench. They'll make an impact. I like what they did. But how does it click together? I want them to show me. I still think, though, that they're an NCAA tournament team, provided nothing goes sideways as it did last year. Virginia, on the other hand, I think Virginia, we've seen this shift with Tony Bennett. There was a run where Virginia seemed unstoppable. They seemed like they were truly becoming one of the blue bloods of the sport, number 1 seed year in, year out. As long as he was the coach, it was going to be that way. And then there was a little bit of a slip in terms of the production that we saw from this group. I think they lost to the 16 seed. There were plenty of jokes made about that, but they came back. They avenged that. Since then, though, it just hasn't quite been the same. I do like their roster quite a bit. I love Reese Beekman. He's one of my favorite players. Just from an intensity standpoint, the way that he plays, I'm a big fan of him. And they bring in some interesting pieces from the transfer portal. I think that they have a high ceiling. But I want, like I do with North Carolina, I want them to show me that they truly are at that level that they were previously, because I can't continue to rely on my past experiences, the things that I think about the Virginia program, when that just hasn't been the case the last few years. Like I said, though, they do bring in plenty of talent, guys who have an impact or have a chance to make an impact on this roster. We talk about guys like Jordan Minor, who will be an immediate boost in the front court. Jake Groves, what can he offer coming from Oklahoma? I look at in the backcourt, you've got Dante Harris, who kind of went under the radar. I think he transferred so early in the process. He's a guy who was averaging double figures at one point in his college career. He comes in, what can he offer? And Andrew Rohde, one of the biggest unknowns. He came from a lower level of the sport. Can he prove that he can make that kind of impact on the wing against ACC competition? That remains to be determined, but I do like their roster. I think they are an NCAA tournament team for sure. Can they get back into that, top 2 seed conversation? That is the part that remains to be determined. Now, as we get into this next group, it's a large group. We'll just say that. It includes NC State, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and Clemson. And I think that between these 4 teams, there's really so much we can talk about. We can talk about Jack Clark and Ben Middlebrooks swapping sides between NC State and Clemson. We can talk about Joe Girard coming from Syracuse to Clemson. Virginia Tech getting back some big pieces of their roster, not the least of which Hunter Couture. Wake Forest, what they've been able to do in recent years with transfer guards coming in and putting up big numbers with Steve Forbes. Bobby Klintman comes back for a second season. I think that these teams all have such a wide range. They could be off the bubble. We could not be talking about them by March. Or they could be a 5 seed. There's really so much room in these 4 teams in what they can be. And it's so hard to predict. There's new faces. There's inconsistent past results with a lot of these teams, ups and downs from season to season based on the impact that they've been able to get out of their newcomers each year. So what will those teams look like? I think that will be a storyline all season. I also, Pittsburgh. I throw Pittsburgh in this group too. And that's a team that everyone had been down on for so long. Then last year, it seemed like they finally started to get things figured out. I would like to see them carry that momentum into this year and build on the success. But in this ACC, I think it's so wide open in the middle of this pack. I'm just not sure I can count on them to do so. So I put them right there at the bottom of that group. So we talk about this next group. We talk about some new faces. We talk about teams that have a new head coach in place, a lot of roster turnover, and we talk about what are they going to be? Can they show you something this season? That, of course, includes Syracuse under Red Autry after the retirement of Jim Boeheim. He lost some key pieces. He did retain a few key pieces as well. He was able to bring in a couple of good transfers. J.J. Starling. He brings in Westry. I think they've got some good pieces on the roster, but they lose Jesse Edwards. They lose Joe Girard. It's just hard to bet on them being good in year 1, especially the slip we had seen in the program over the past couple of seasons. And so I think then we move down to Notre Dame and Micah Shrewsbury, who did excellent things at Penn State over the last couple of years, really turned them into a NCAA tournament type of team. And I think that for him, there's just so much roster turnover. We're talking about almost an entirely new roster, a team that really struggled last year too, and you lose probably the 3 biggest pieces in Cormac Ryan, J.J. Starling, and Vin Allen Lubin. Those were the 3 pieces you would have liked to build your team around this season. He doesn't have those in place. Now he brings some players in. I just think it's going to take him time like it did at Penn State. That does not mean that I don't think he will have great success there. I think he'll get that thing rolling, but he's going to need to show some patience. Now, this this last team in this category, we talk about Georgia Tech. We talk about Josh Pastner on his way out. In comes Damon Stoudemire. Damon Stoudemire, the most interesting hire of the three in this category that we're going to talk about, because he coached at the college level, at a lower college level, had relative success with his team out on the West Coast in the West Coast Conference, but then decides to take an assistant job with the Boston Celtics. He's been working in the NBA, and so he brings a different mindset. He's got the connection with these players. As a former player, you're always going to have that little leg up that they can relate to you a little bit more. He brings that in addition to experience at both levels. He's been a head coach in college. He's been an assistant in the NBA. How much does that help him when it comes to his ability to relate with players? That's what you need to be a great recruiter. You've been a head coach in college, so you know how to go out, identify talent, build a staff, all the ins and outs that go with college basketball coaching. You also have that NBA experience where you were able to see what it's like, the advanced stages of game planning, the things that you do at the next level. And you couple that NBA experience with being a former NBA player, and you've got a great pitch to go into people's houses, go into schools, and pitch to kids, I know how to get you to the NBA. Now, the biggest thing you can do as a coach with that pitch is put somebody in the NBA. Is there anyone on this roster who can make the NBA? I'm not sure. We could see a big jump out of someone, sure. And that might happen this year. But I think that's when this thing is going to take off. That's going to be the key for Damon Stoudemire, is going to be getting that one player to take a chance on him, to attach his name to the Georgia Tech program, and that will elevate things in how it's grouped. They're in a perfect recruiting hotbed there in Atlanta, Georgia. He will have no shortage of opportunities to land big-time players. It's all about capitalizing, and you've got to get somebody to become a trendsetter if you're going to make that happen. Now, this bottom group is really teams that I don't want. We'll throw Boston College in. They just don't have a lot on this roster. Not sure what they're going to be able to showcase this year, if anything. Florida State, man, what a sad recent couple of years for Leonard Hamilton, and just a Hall of Fame career that has kind of faded into just nothing. Like, we don't talk about Leonard Hamilton. We don't talk about Florida State. And it came really suddenly. It's an interesting thing to try to dissect. It's not like they didn't hit the transfer portal. They've brought in transfers. They've just missed on them. They haven't stopped recruiting. They still get the 4-star guys that they got before. They're just not developing. They've had so many injuries. They've had so many problems, so many guys transferring out after a rough season, and it's just hard to sustain. So I feel bad for Leonard Hamilton, but I'm not quite sure, after you lose Matthew Cleveland, you lose Caleb Mills, you lose your seniors outgoing, like, what are you going to be able to do this season? Hopefully bring that team back up into that conversation, at least get them on the bubble. But based off of today, what I've seen, I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to do it. And at the bottom of this conference, and this is where we're going to talk about one scrimmage. And I said, don't put too much into it, and I'm not going to. But they did. Louisville, under Kenny Payne, just lost to a Division II school, Kentucky Wesleyan, last night in a scrimmage. That on its own, we've seen other D2 schools win scrimmages against decent competition. It is what it is. But for Kenny Payne, it's more than that. It's more than that because it keeps happening. It happened last year in the preseason. It happened against Bellarmine during the regular season. They lost to a number of teams that were considered bye games, teams that you pay to come play you so that you can get an easy win. They lost just about all of them. It was ugly for that Louisville team. And so you come into this season, you pitch that it's year 2, it's going to be better. We've got more players, we've got everything we need. And then you do it again. And we've seen players leave the program. We've seen players talk about that program. It's just, Louisville is a historic basketball program, even more so than Florida State. We talk about it being sad that Florida State is down right now. Louisville is not even close to being relevant. And if they win less than 10 games again this year, I will not be surprised. And I think that they have to really, really consider the long-term damage being done if they don't make a move with Kenny Payne unless things rapidly turn in a positive direction. Because this is how you get a bad reputation with the whole next generation. This is how a school like Nebraska in football still can't recruit today. Everyone talks about, how did this happen? They were so dominant in the 90s. Well, the kids playing college football were born after 2000. So why do they care about the success from the 90s? They just don't. It doesn't matter to them. They care about what they see over the past few years. They care about their memories from their childhood. Louisville's still got the childhood memories for this. Like, they're right on the edge of it. They've got those Rick Pitino years. They've got some recent success. Yes, there was a scandal attached to it. Things got vacated, but it's still in your mind. You still remember Donovan Mitchell playing there. You remember those guys and what they were able to accomplish, where they were able to go from there. But in recent years, there hasn't been that at Louisville, especially the last two. There's been very little to cheer about. El Ellis was about it. Now he's at Arkansas. He might even come off the bench at Arkansas just to be somewhere else, be somewhere he can win. And so what doesn't help Kenny Payne's cause is losing this game and then having to go into the season with no hype. There is zero momentum. Everything is down. Everything is bad. Kentucky fans are making fun of them online. Louisville fans are just already beside themselves about what this season is going to be. And you don't ever want to enter a season waiting to fire the coach. That feels like where we're at with that fan base. How do they get it resolved? We'll see. I mean, they've got the history. That's what I'm saying. Go get the right coach if that need arises after next season. When we come back on the other side, we will be talking with Parth Upadhyaya of the Daily Memphian, a former rival of Louisville, that Memphis team. So we'll get his thoughts on them and more right here on Three True Values. Welcome back into Three True Values. I'm here with Parth Upadhyaya, and we are talking Memphis hoops. He covers the program for the Daily Memphian. He's around it. He knows everything going on. And so, Parth, I'll just open it up with this. What are your thoughts on this team so far? You've seen scrimmages. You've kind of gotten to see what the roster looks like. I know that's been a big concern from the fan base. We don't know who these guys are. They're all new. What have you seen from them?
Yeah, it was definitely a concern early in the offseason when there was a mass exodus, right, of guys leaving, entering the portal, or, just kind of moving on from the program. And then there was the NIL thing, right? Like, there was murmurs and some stuff that was actually validated in terms of the program not having enough resources in that department. Obviously, Penny and his staff got things together, and they were able to bring in a transfer class of 8 guys, a lot of them pretty highly regarded, highly heralded, if you will, coming in. So definitely questions about not so much talent, because the talent's there, right? You've got guys who are in their 6th year of college basketball, some of them close to my age, right? And I'm 25, 26 rather. But the question was, how do these pieces fit together? Will guys who were option 1 or option 2 on their previous teams be willing to take smaller roles for the betterment of the team? That remains to be seen, right? Like, this is kind of the Penny Hardaway called it the honeymoon period. And I think that's the perfect way to put it. Where you've got excitement toward the season. You've got these exhibitions where you're blowing teams out by 57 points, as Memphis did against Lane College on Sunday. So everything's good now, but I guess, like I said, it remains to be seen if that will be the case moving forward. As far as the team, man, like, like I said, they've got experience, they've got length, they've got athleticism. And I think those are the things that, kind of on paper make the roster, in my opinion, a AP top 25 deserving roster. And I actually voted for them in my preseason poll at 25th. But man, the skepticism I think comes from just the fact that, voters have, voted Penny Hardaway's teams in the past. We've seen them be as high as 12th, right, in the preseason in Penny's tenure, and it hasn't always panned out. So I think, folks have gotten burned once. It's like, let's take a wait and see approach, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of this team and where they are. And I think we've seen Penny's teams be at their best. There's two kind of things that we've seen propel them forward. It's been when they have a dominant big man at the 5 spot, and when they have a clear pecking order, when they know who the go-to guy is. Last year, you knew it was Kendrick Davis. Can Jordan Brown be that for this team? Can he serve both of those roles, be that 5-man and also be the go-to guy? Because he's looked great so far, and obviously we know his track record.
Yeah, I think yes and no. So to answer your first question, yeah, he can definitely be the dominant kind of oak tree-esque, right, big man who's you can feed it into, and he's almost either guaranteed to get a foul or a bucket, especially in this AAC that's significantly watered down, which we'll get to in a second, hopefully. But as far as being the guy, I think with the way Memphis plays, getting up and down the court, that up-tempo style of play, I think that style is more suited towards someone like, David Jones, right? Like, who's also looked dominant. Every report coming out of that program has been that he's been kind of emerging as the alpha, as the leader. Obviously small sample size, but we saw, in the exhibition on Sunday against Lane College where he had 18 points, I believe it was, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, a little bit of everything. Yeah. So I think someone like that is more, I guess, tailor-made, if you will, to be that guy for a Penny Hardaway team.
Yeah, I think that David Jones, when he transferred, I think it was John Rothstein, he said potential player of the year candidate, and it kind of raised some eyebrows. People said, whoa, like he was good, but can he be that good? It sounds like he really could be. And I think the other thing that Memphis has coming in, they got him late. Javon Quinterly, he comes in. I covered him at Alabama. Now you get to cover him at Memphis. So he's a guy really late in the cycle, but he ends up in the portal. Penny brings him in, and it really solidified that point guard spot, which had been a little bit of a question mark given some things that we'll talk about later and just general roster concerns.
Yeah, so I think, Penny needed a guy who is a veteran, who can orchestrate things, who can kind of run the show, and I think Javon Quinterly checks all those boxes. Is he going to be an electrifying scorer the way Kendrick Davis was a season ago? Probably not, and you probably don't need him to be. This team has enough weapons where, the offensive load's kind of better distributed versus last year where, you're giving the ball to Kendrick Davis and saying, hey, make something happen. Javon's been, as like a integral part of, successful teams, last year included, when he was coming off that ACL injury and kind of found his rhythm late in the season, to score 22 points in the SEC tournament title game, to score 22 points in the second round, to get them to the Sweet 16. So he's done it at the highest level at a Power 5 conference. So I think that's exactly the type of guy that Penny was looking for.
Right. And one thing that I think Memphis fans will start to notice is he's developed huge strides over the past couple of years. He can play off the ball too. So if Caleb Mills wants to be on the ball, if David Jones needs it in his hands, he can spot up, he can knock down those jumpers, he can move without the ball a lot better than I think people would have given him credit for when he came in as that 5-star kid, jelly fam, all that, known for having the ball kind of, locked in his hands. And I think off the court, Memphis has also got multiple storylines going here. Both of them involve the last name Williams. We'll start with Mikey, and what's the latest on him? Because he's still he's not with the team. Still enrolled as of now, I believe. Last I heard. So what's the latest there? Obviously, additional charges have been brought against him.
Yeah, like you touched on, he's still enrolled as a student at the University of Memphis. He's an online student. Is out in the San Diego area taking classes online. Is still listed on the team's roster, right? Like, doesn't have a headshot up there, doesn't have a number, but he is on that official roster on U of M's athletic site. And from the minute this thing kind of unfolded with this, April 13th arrest, Penny has stood by this kid, publicly, has said, hey, he hasn't been charged with anything. We still stand by Mikey. We're going to support him. We're going to wait and see what happens. And man, this thing has not gotten better, right? Like there were 6 charges initially, 6 felony gun charges. Well, now we found out last week during his what was supposed to be his arraignment that he didn't show up to, showed up via Zoom, that 3 more charges were added due to witness testimony that showed that he made verbal threats prior to firing the gun, that showed that there was a 6th person in that vehicle that he shot at, not 5, but 6. That resulted in 3 more felony gun charges. Now you're looking at 9 felony gun charges, up to 30 years in prison. He's facing some serious consequences, right? That are bigger than basketball. We asked Penny about it shortly after when we talked to him late last week, and he said the same thing. He said that, hey, we're sticking by Mikey. He has not been charged of anything yet. And that's kind of their stance. Will he ever play, at the University of Memphis? I don't think so. Like, I think it'd be crazy for anybody to bank on that, even being a high possibility at this point.
Right. I think that's definitely fair. And I go back and forth, and I think a lot of people do. You've got your group that just wants him gone from the program. They want him completely cut ties. And that's a fair thing, because it's every time that now he's in the headline, it's Memphis guard, Mikey Williams. That's tied to the program, and that's not good light to put this city or that program in. But I also see Penny trying to do a good thing for a kid here. Regardless of what happens in this trial, he is enrolled in college right now. He is taking classes. That is something that can benefit him down the line, whether it is when this case is resolved and he is set free, or if he has to serve time, it's still going to benefit him when he does eventually get to the next phases of his life, having that college education. So I see, Penny, why he would not want to back off of this, but it's a really tough spot to be in.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, absolutely, you can see both sides of it. Penny has a track record, right, of being a mentor, of being a guy who wants to help kids in tough situations. Well, he can do all of that without Mikey Williams being officially part of this program, right? Like, you can say, hey, man, look, like, we've got to do what's best for the university. I've got, he can even blame it on people above him, whether it be the president, whether it be AD Laird Veach, whoever he wants to point at and say, hey, man, like, these are the instructions I'm getting. You can't be part of this program with what you have going on. That's just the university policy, but I'd love to help you. Let's stay in touch. Let's talk weekly, daily, whatever it may be. He can do all of those things without associating Mikey Williams, who right now has 9 felony gun charges with the University of Memphis. And I think the people on that end of the fence who think, hey, this guy should be gone, I mean, they have a fair point as well, right? Like, this thing is not getting better. The more details that are revealed, it doesn't paint Mikey Williams in a great light at all.
No. And particularly in the state of California with the different laws versus other states as well. So as we kind of move on, this is the last topic we'll touch on here.
Sure.
I think Memphis, as you touched on, they're outside the top 25. People are taking a wait and see approach. But one of the things that I think takes them over the top, where you have to say, all right, we've seen enough, and maybe we don't see it on the court, but we see the roster, is DeAndre Williams, a guy who has proven that he can be one of the top college basketball players, production-wise, a leader, a guy who just brings all kinds of things to your program. You plug him into that veteran lineup, and what does that do for this team?
I think it, like you just suggested, it changes things dramatically. I think it helps with the pecking order as well. You've got a guy who's been in Penny Hardaway's system for 3 years prior to this one. Now, if he comes in, who's coming off a season where he averaged 17 and 8, was all conference, was at times one of the best big men in the country, in my opinion. I think everybody can understand. You would hope, if you're Penny and the staff, that, hey, that is our guy. That's who we're going to kind of run things through. That's going to be the leader in the locker room, on the court, etc. That helps that regard as well. And then, on the court, you're adding that kind of production to this team that, already has a ton of experience, already has a ton of talent, ton of length, ton of athleticism. I think that puts Memphis, in a spot where, if you were to ask AP voters, hey, redo your ballot with DeAndre Williams, I think many of them would vote Memphis in the top 25, and, you'd see a number next to the Tigers going into the season. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think it changes things dramatically. It makes almost anything possible. I know that's saying a lot, but it makes Memphis a true, dark horse Final Four contender. I know people have said that already, but it kind of cements that theory.
It does, for sure. And I've got them. I think that really is the difference between like a first, second round team and dark horse Final Four. That really could be the difference. And I know the NCAA, they don't reveal too many things. They work on their own schedule. We've seen these things get dragged out into the season. Is there any end in sight here?
It's tough. We asked Penny about it prior to the first exhibition on Sunday, and he said, man, look, NCAA, they don't have no timetable. And he's absolutely right. They don't. They don't have a timetable. They don't have any consistency about the way they do things. People pointed at Tez Walker, right? The receiver in North Carolina, who went through a similar thing in terms of the appeals. Different situation that led to that, but similar in regards of denied. Eventually they kept banging down the door of NCAA, and they were told yes. That's that situation. This is this one. Could there be some similarities in terms of the process? Absolutely. Doesn't mean the NCAA is going to rule, similarly. No, it doesn't, right? Like there's no consistency in the way they do things.
There has
so
not
it's kind of a wait and see approach. It does seem like the level of optimism, with people in the program, people around that situation has increased slightly. Why that is, I don't know the full details of that, to be honest with you. So just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, thank you once again, Parth, for coming on. Why don't you let everybody know where they can follow you, where they can find your work, and keep up with all things Memphis basketball?
Yeah, absolutely. DailyMemphian.com is, where my work is at. And you can follow me on Twitter at PUPADHYAYA_. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on. Enjoyed talking hoops with you.
Cool. Appreciate it, man.
Welcome back into Three True Values. I want to thank Parth once again for joining the show. Great to get his opinion on all things Memphis basketball. And now we talk about the American Athletic Conference. And, some people might say it's a little bit of bias. Some people might say it's because we just had on a Memphis beat writer, but I'm putting Memphis at the top of my AAC standings. I know FAU is the popular pick. I know they made the Final Four run last year. They did all this. Everybody has them in the top 5, the top 10, the top 4 of their preseason rankings. I just want to pump the brakes a little bit. I'm not telling you they're not going to be great. They're going to be really good. They bring back the whole roster, basically. The FAU team is going to be really, really good. I think they're closer to 20th than 4th, though. And here's why. Last year we came into the season, North Carolina was ranked number 1 in the country. Why wouldn't they be? They went on this magical run all the way to the championship. Year 1 under Hubert Davis. They were bringing in more players. They returned all of their core guys. They returned Baycott. They returned Love. They returned Davis. They bring in Nance. They just everything was going to be perfect. Nobody saw any way they weren't going to be one of the top teams in college basketball, excuse me. And then they weren't. Why? Because we looked at March and we said, wow, look at what they were able to do. We didn't pay attention to the entire rest of the year. Now, FAU had a great year. All season, they were excellent. 30-win basketball team. I'm not telling you that they did not have success last year. But here's what I am going to tell you. They played in an 8-9 seed game to start the NCAA tournament. So their strength of schedule was a question for the committee. A 30-win team playing in the 8-9 game means that the committee does not value their schedule at all. They don't view them as a top 25 team. So entering March, they were not considered a top 25 team by the selection committee. They were considered a good mid-major team that beat a bunch of crappy teams. That's what everyone thought about. They went on a run. They beat Memphis. They beat Fairleigh Dickinson. They make it all the way to the Final Four. But here's the thing. I'm not going to get into, they had an easy path. Like, yeah, they played a 16 seed. But that 16 seed looked really good. I'm not going to get into strength of schedule last year. How good was it? How bad was it? Were they really 30-win quality? They won 30 games. They did that. Can't take that away from them. They made the Final Four. You can't take that away from them. But what you can talk about is the fact that they are making a leap from Conference USA to the American. They are playing better competition night in and night out than they previously were. So you couple that with now Everyone knows about you. You're not sneaking up on people. You're not just another game on the schedule. You are reigning Final Four team FAU. You don't think they're going to get Memphis's best shot when they play them? Memphis, a team that gets up for big games. That's, under Penny Hardaway, that has always been the case. Think about those Houston games. They didn't win all of them, but they all came down to the last 30 seconds or overtime. It was back and forth and back and forth the whole game. Same thing sometimes with those Cincinnati matchups. Now you get rid of some of those teams. They don't have to face Houston. That'll be good for them. But they still have a tougher schedule this year than last year. And so I'm not saying that they won't have great success. But I think if you were 30-4 last year and the committee did not consider you a top 25 team, you face tougher competition. We can assume you're going to lose a couple more games than you did last season. Will the offset between the strength of schedule and the amount of losses be enough to keep them in that top 25 conversation, excluding our thoughts about who they are because of what we saw in March? That's my question about FAU. I still think they will be excellent. I think at the top of this conference, you have it's a two-team race at the top. It's Memphis and it's FAU. I think Memphis, they bring in Jordan Brown, they bring in David Jones, they bring in Caleb Mills, they bring in Javon Quinterly. I mean, they remade this roster. And I know some fans kind of like scoff at that, but this is the best roster he could have built. If you're Penny Hardaway, you got better players coming off the bench than you would have otherwise been able to. If you had tried to bring back as much of last year's team as possible and just fill out the pieces with freshmen and whatever, you were not building a roster this good. And so, yes, there's a lot of turnover, and it turns off some fans because they don't know the names as much, but you'll get to know them. You got 30-plus games to get to know these players. And some of them established players already, so you probably, if you follow college basketball outside of just your team, you're still going to know who they are. And I think that they fit really well together, at least so far from what we've seen. JQ, Jordan Brown, I think that's going to be a great point guard, big combo. The potential for this Memphis team, I think, is second weekend and beyond. I think they've got that kind of team. This is probably the best team going into the season that Penny Hardaway has put together, excluding, I know some people will mention the Jalen Duren and Monty Bates here, and I might have fallen into that category. I might have at the time believed that at the start, but we know that one went poorly. We know there were issues with Amani Bates. There were issues with Landers Nolly. The chemistry on that team, it just didn't add up. They still went to the second round of the tournament and gave Gonzaga all they could handle for most of that game. But it just didn't click the way people thought it might. This year's team, though, you've got a lot more veterans. You got a lot more guys who have been there, done it. They've been around different teammates. I think that really is the difference for this year's group. Now, DeAndre Williams. Is he gonna play? Will he be eligible? Is the NCAA going to rule on? I have no idea at this point. I felt confident early in the process. He met some of the criteria. I thought it was a good case for him to get one. But now we've seen waivers that we thought were home runs. There was no chance the NCAA was going to try to fight it, and they've denied them. And then they've let a couple others through that you just – who knows what the NCAA is going to do. You guys, if you've listened to any of my podcasts, you know my feelings on how the NCAA runs things, particularly when it comes to these student athletes. They don't treat them right. There's no consistency. These kids have they're flying blind every offseason. And the NCAA has decided that they can retroactively just take away whatever they want from these kids. That's what they've decided they can do. So I hope for DeAndre Williams' sake, he likely passed up on some professional opportunities, not the NBA, of course, but whether it's G League or going overseas, there's money to be made. And he decided to bypass that to stay at Memphis and try to play another season. Who knows if that's going to happen or not. FAU, though, we know about them. John L. Davis comes back. Elijah Martin comes back. Golden in the middle. we've got the group is all here. And they looked really good. The way they clicked, the way they interacted, I think that they will be a top 25 on that bubble, top 25 team. I think they're a lock to be in the NCAA tournament. I think they can make more noise in the NCAA tournament. They are a matchup nightmare for so many teams and the way they want to play college basketball. So I think that they have a really good chance there to maybe not repeat, but to build on success from last year. Dusty May, I mean, he did one of the best jobs in college basketball building that roster. We talk about in the second tier, we talk about Tulane. I think that's it. I think this next tier of teams that can win the title if they have the perfect season. It's Tulane. Tulane brings back Jalen Forbes, a guy who tested the NBA waters, a guy who put up great numbers. He did it efficiently last season, and he's got potential to take even another step this year. And so I think if they had brought back, and this is where we play what if, and if you're a Tulane fan, I'm sorry, but we're going to play what if for a second here. What if Jalen Cook came back? I mean, what could this team be? They bring back some really, really good talent with Jalen Forbes. You bring back Kevin Cross as well, a senior. And I think with Ron Hunter coaching that team, that group of three could have competed with anyone at the top of this conference. But now you wonder, like, are those two going to have enough between the two of them? Now you bring in some really good transfers too. You bring in a Trey Davis, Colby King, Jordan Wood. You bring in, they've filled out this roster. Greg Glenn, I think, will be a really interesting one. Guy who went to Michigan, didn't have the success that he would have hoped for, but he's a 4-star guy, like right at top 100, I believe. Now he comes to Tulane. Can he find that success? Can he kickstart things for the Green Wave? Beyond that, I think other teams that could make some noise, but we just got to wait and see on these teams. I think it's UAB, Wichita State. You talk about Andy Kennedy, what he's been able to do at UAB over the past couple of years now. They're like FAU. They're taking a step up in competition. How will they adjust to that? Wichita State, Paul Mills coming in year one. That program has been down the past couple of years. He brought in some transfers. What will he be able to make out of that roster? Can he get them going? SMU, again, they've got talent there. They've got some really good players. I'll be interested to see if they can build with Zurich Phelps and find more success as the season goes on. North Texas, another one. I think it's just too much for them. I think that's where we cut it off. I think we go North Texas and down. They don't really have a shot to win this league. They lose McCaslin. He was a great coach, and I just think that maybe the new coach can continue what was built and build on it even further. But I wouldn't bet on that given how good McCaslin was. At the bottom of the conference, I do have Tulsa. I think also Rice and UTSA, along with Charlotte, they'll probably struggle through parts of the season, adjusting to that higher competition level that we've talked about a few times now. But that's our look at the AAC. That's what I think going into this season. I hope you guys have enjoyed this preview series as we've talked each week about a different conference. Feel free, if you have a conference that you love to talk about, that you love to think about, that you're not prepared for yet, go back, listen to the past episodes. We've done all of the Power 5, quote-unquote, schools, as well as the Big East, the American, West Coast Conference. We talked about the Mountain West. We even talked about the Atlantic 10 and the Missouri Valley. So you can check out all of those, get up to date on everything you need to know, because we are less than a week away from college basketball. Tomorrow, the calendar flips to November. So be ready, because basketball is coming in full force. I can't wait. I hope you're as excited as I am. We'll be back next week to talk about the start of the season, what we saw on opening night, as well as just get you ready for the whole non-conference slate. What are we going to be talking about? And that's right, the return of game of the week in the final segment. Can't wait to do it. Thank you once again. I am James Fletcher with 3 True Values.